An old stone well stands abandoned in tall, autumn grass. Behind it, 85 acres of northern wilderness, stretched toward mountains lost in cloud. Bonhammer. The wooden boards covering the well have been moved recently. A woman in a traveling kneels at the edge of stone. Her gloved hands grip iron rungs, descending into darkness. 20 feet down, maybe 30. There's no water at the bottom. Just a ladder. A well doesn't need a ladder. Her face in the pale dawn light. Gray eyes, a jaw set against something deeper than fear. She holds an iron key. Old, ornate. The kind that opens what was meant to stay closed. Wide shot. From inside the well looking up, her silhouette against gray sky. Then, she begins to climb down. Below the stones, below the earth. Below everything she thought she knew about the man buried 6 months ago. From somewhere far beneath her boots, breathing slow, ragged, human. Isara Winfield pressed a clean cloth against the gash on young Thomas Weatherby's forehead. Blood soaked through, immediately. "Hold still," she murmured. The boy was 7, maybe 8. He'd fallen from the miller's fence, trying to prove he could walk the top beam. Boys, and their need to prove things that it hurts. Thomas whimpered, "I know." She threaded the needle with practiced hands. 29 years old, and she'd stitched more wounds than she cared to count. Her late husband used to joke that she had steadier hands than the physicians in Ravencross. That was 4 years ago, before the fever took him. Before she became a widow at 25, with a 1-year-old daughter, before she learned what it meant to be truly alone. The healing house smelled like chamomile and desperation. 6 months. She'd been carrying the weight of her father's death. 6 months of waking at dawn to 10 sick villagers in Windermere. 6 months of pretending she was fine when Bryn asked why grandfather wasn't coming for supper anymore. 6 months of existing in that particular kind of numbness that comes after loss, of the kind where you function. Where you smile when expected, where you fold laundry and brew tea and answer questions about which herbs cure fever. But inside, you're still standing in November rain, watching a wooden coffin sink into cold earth. The messenger arrived while Isara was washing blood from her hands. A young man in gray livery from Ravencross, judging by the crest on his satchel. Isara Winfield. She dried her hands on her apron. Yes, he produced a sealed letter, heavy parchment. Official wax seal, the kind that makes your stomach drop before you even open it. From the offices of Wendell Cross, Esquire. I'm to wait for your response. Isara broke the seal. The words swam before her eyes. Dear Miss Winfield, it is my duty to inform you that you are Sibyl, the sole beneficiary of the estate of Aldwyn Winfield. Deceased. Said estate includes 85 acres of land in the Silverpine region, Northern Territories of the realm. As executor of Mr. Winfield's will, I request your presence in Ravencross at your earliest convenience to finalize the transfer of deed. Additionally, Mr. Winf left specific instructions regarding the property, which must be conveyed to you in person. Yours in service, Wendell Cross, 85 acres. Her father, the man who lived in a three-room cottage and mended horseshoes for copper, owned 85 acres in Silverpine, a place Isara had never heard him mention, not once, not in 29 years. She read the letter 3 times, then a 4th. The messenger shifted his weight. Miss, your response? I'll come, she heard herself say. Very good. Mr. Cross will expect you within the fortnight. The messenger departed. Isara stood in the doorway of the healing house, holding a letter that made no sense. 85 acres. From a man who told her nothing about his life. before Windermere, who deflected every question about family with the same patient phrase, "Some stories are better left untold, daughter." And now he was dead. And now she owned land she didn't know existed. That evening, Isra sat at her small kitchen table, trying to explain the letter to Bryn. "Grandfather left us something," she said carefully. Bryn looked up from her wooden blocks, 5 years old, with her grandfather's gray eyes and her mother's dark hair. "What kind of something?" "Land. Far away in the north. Can we go see it?" Isara hesitated. The journey would take 4 days by wagon. She had patients who needed her: the widow Thorne's rheumatism, little Margaret's persistent cough, old Samuel's heart condition that worsened every winter. But 85 acres, and specific instructions that could only be conveyed in person. Why? What could her father possibly have needed to say that required lawyers and sealed letters? "Maybe," Isara said. "I need to think about it." Bryn returned to her blocks, building towers that would inevitably fall the way everything does. Eventually. The knock came after Bryn had gone to bed. Isara opened the door to find Declan Ashridge on her doorstep, tall, broad-shouldered, gray beard going white at the edges, the man who'd appeared 7 years ago, claiming to be her father's old friend from the cavalry. The man who'd helped arrange her husband's funeral, who'd sat with her through the worst of her grief, who'd been there at Aldwyn's burial, steady and solid while Isara fell apart. "I heard," Declan said without preamble, "about the letter. News traveled fast in Windermere." "How?" The messenger stopped at the tavern. "Talked too much." Of course, he had. Declan stepped inside without invitation, not rudely. Just with the ease of someone who'd been coming to this house for 7 years. 85 acres in Silverpine, he said. "That's not a small holding. I didn't know he had it." Aldwyn kept things close. That was the understatement of the century. Declan moved to the hearth, warmed his hands. "When are you planning to go?" "I don't know. I have patience. I could come with you." Isara blinked. "What?" 4 days north is a long journey for a woman alone. "I've been to the Silverpine region. I could help." There was something in his voice, something that made Isara pause. "You've been to Silverpine years ago, with the regiment. Did my father ever mention that area to you?" Declan's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Too quick to identify. "No," he said. "Never." And that tiny hesitation before the word, that fraction of a second too long, that made Isara's instincts prickle. The same instincts that told her when a patient was hiding symptoms, when a fever was about to break, when something was wrong, even if she couldn't name it yet. "I appreciate the offer," she said carefully. "Let me think about it." Declan nodded. The warm,
reassuring smile she'd trusted. For 7 years, of course.
No rush. He left shortly after Isara stood in her empty kitchen and replayed the conversation. "Did my father ever mention that area to you?" "No, never." But his voice had caught, just for a moment, and Declan Ashridge had always been smooth as river stones. 3 days later, Isara found herself on a wagon heading north with Declan driving, and Bryn bundled in blankets beside her. She'd arranged for the village herbalist to cover her patients, packed enough clothes for a wish and over for a war, left instructions with the widow Thorne about where to find the spare key, and tried to ignore the uneasy feeling that had settled in her chest like a stone. Declan was cheerful during the journey. He told stories about the cavalry days, about battles he and Aldwyn had supposedly fought together, about the time they'd held a bridge against raiders for 3 days straight. The stories sounded right. They had the texture of truth, Except, what year was that? Asara asked. The bridge battle? Declan's hands tightened on the reins, just slightly. 23 years back, give or take. My father would have been 37s. Sounds right. He never mentioned serving in the cavalry. Aldwin didn't talk about the Wahaba, Kokach. That much was true. But still, something sat wrong. Like a puzzle piece, forced into the wrong space. They stopped for the night at a coaching inn called the Broken Wheel. Bryn fell asleep immediately after supper. Ira tucked her daughter into the narrow bed and sat by the window. Outside, Declan stood in the stable yard talking to the ostler, too far away to hear words. But she could see his face in the lamplight, see the way he glanced back at the inn, at her window, then quickly away. A man checking to make sure he wasn't observed. Isara's unease deepened. She thought about her father's face the last time she'd seen him alive, 6 months and 3 days ago. He'd come for supper, played with Bryn, fixed the squeaky floorboard in the hallway. And as he was leaving, he'd stopped in the doorway, looked at Isara with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You're strong," he'd said. "Stronger than you know. I learned from you." He'd smiled, sad and soft. "No, daughter, you were always strong. I just tried not to break it." At the time, she'd thought it was one of his philosophical moods. Now she wondered if he'd been saying goodbye, if he'd known that in 3 weeks he'd be dead, or whatever had actually happened. They reached Silverpine on the 4th day. The land opened up before them like something from a painting. Rolling hills covered in autumn grass, pine forests dark against gray sky, mountains rising in the distance with their peaks lost in cloud. And in the middle of it all, a house, 2 stories. White paint peeling like old skin, a porch that sagged on the left side. A barn further back, silver with age. 85 acres of silence and wind, and the smell of cold air coming down from the peaks. Sarah climbed down from the wagon. She walked toward the house, feeling like she'd stepped into someone else's life. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be her father's. The man who lived in a cottage barely big enough for 2. Who owned nothing but his smithing tools and a few changes of clothes. Declan came to stand beside her. "Lot of land," he said. His voice was neutral. Too neutral. "Yes. What do you think you'll do with it?" Isara looked at him, really looked at him, at the way he was studying the property, not what with curiosity, with assessment, like someone cataloging assets. "I have no idea," she said honestly. They went inside. The house smelled like cedar and old paper and something faintly metallic, like the air had been sitting still for a very long time. The furniture was sparse. A table, some chairs. A bookcase with a handful of volumes. Upstairs there were 2 bedrooms. Both empty. Both carrying that same feeling of careful abandonment. Like someone had left intending for things to be found in a particular state. Declan settled onto the couch downstairs. With Bryn. "I'll get a fire going," he said. "You explore." Isara climbed the stairs again. In the 2nd bedroom, the smaller one at the back of the house. Moonlight fell through a single window across wooden floorboards, and that's where she stopped. One of the boards was raised, one of the diamonds warped, not broken, just raised. The edges showed scratches, the careful, repeated marks of something lifted many times. Isara's heart began to beat faster. She knelt, worked her fingers into the gap. The board came up smoothly, like the nails had been removed years ago, and only weight held it in place. Beneath was a metal box, wrapped in cloth that had once been green. She lifted it out, not heavy, but significant, the way small containers of important things always are. Inside, a large iron key, old, ornate, the kind that opened something meant to stay closed. A hand-drawn map on paper showing the farmstead and surrounding hills with a location circled in red ink behind the barn. Next to the circle in her father's careful handwriting, old well, and beneath those, a single sheet of paper folded once, so Sarah unfolded it. 4 lines in her father's hand, no date, no preamble, so Sarah. If you are reading this, I am still alive. Go to the location on the map. Alone. Do not trust Declan Ashridge. He is not who he says he is. He came to watch you. The room tilted. Asara read it again, then a third time. The words didn't change. Do not trust Declan Ashridge downstairs. She could hear Declan's voice, low murmur, talking to Bryn, the warm, steady presence that had been in her life for 7 years. Who'd held her hand at her father's grave. Who'd called every week to check on her. Who'd driven 4 days to help her with this inheritance. He came to watch you. Isara's hands were shaking. She folded the note exactly as it had been, put the map and key in her pocket, replaced the box in the holo beneath the floorboard, set the board back in its place. Then sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and tried to understand what her father had done and why. Aldwyn Winfield had owned this land, had paid taxes on it for years, had written it into his will with specific instructions, had hidden a box beneath the floorboards, had left a map with a marked location, a key, and a warning. Against the one person who was downstairs right now in this house. The one person Isara had trusted after her father died. He came to watch you. Watch her for whom? Watch her for what? She thought about the journey north, about Declan's questions. Did your father ever mention Silverpine? What do you think you'll do with the land? The way he'd assessed the property, the way he'd offered to property, the way he'd offered to come before she'd even decided to go. 7 years of help and kindness and steady presence. All of it calculated. Isara made a decision in that dark room. She would not tell Declan about the note, about the box, about the map or the key or the location behind the barn. She would be calm. She would be mull. And in the morning, she would find a way to go to that well alone. Dawn came cold and gray. Isarsa woke to find Bryn still sleeping and the house quiet. She dressed quickly, pulled on boots and a coat. Downstairs, Declan's door was still closed. She slipped out through the kitchen. The farmstead was silver in the pre-dawn light. The barn sat about 300 yards west of the house, catching the first thin rays of sunrise. Isara moved toward it through tall grass. Dew soaked into her skirts. At the ankles, she rounded the corner of the barn. Behind it, the land opened into rough field bordered by forest. The map had shown the well for instance this city. See? She pushed through weeds and brambles, following the line of an old fence, until she saw it. Stone ring rising from the ground, but then about 50 yards into the field, half hidden by overgrowth. Vines wound around the stones like green rope. Old boards lay across the top, now warped and rotting. Sarah stood at the edge and looked. The boards kept most light out, but through the gaps, she could see there was no water below. The inside walls were dry stone and bolted into the stone on one side, beginning about 3 feet down. Iron rungs of a ladder, old, rust darkened, but solid, the kinds installed deliberately with the intention that it would hold weight. Isara stared at that ladder for a long moment. A well doesn't need a ladder. Not unless there's something at the bottom worth reaching. Her father had circled this spot on the map, had left a key, had gone to extraordinary lengths to make sure she specifically would find this place. She moved the boards aside carefully one by one, set them in the grass. Then took out the small oil lamp she'd brought from the kitchen and looked down at the ladder and the darkness below. She thought about her father, about all the things he had never told her, about all the reasons a man hides something for 23 years without ever telling his daughter. Then grabbed the first rung and began to climb down. The stones of the well wall pressed close on either side. Morning light faded quickly above her as she descended. 10 feet, 15, 20. The air changed. Cooler, stiller, carrying a faint smell of concrete and something else she couldn't place. A closed-kept smell, like a room that had been sealed. Her boots hit solid ground. Isara swept the lamp beam around. Not dirt, concrete. She was standing on a concrete floor at the base of a narrow tunnel that extended horizontally. Away from the well shaft, wooden support beams ran along both walls. Electrical wire, old rubber-coated wire, ran along the ceiling from a junction box near the base of the ladder. Someone had built this not recently. This had taken time and planning and tools and secrecy. Isara stood very still and listened. At first there was nothing, just the sound of her own breathing and the faint rustle of wind somewhere above. Then she heard it, faint. The sound of air moving through a constricted passage, too rhythmic to be wind, too slow to be an animal. Breathing, human breathing. Weak and slightly ragged, coming from somewhere deeper in the tunnel. Every rational part of Isara said to go back up the ladder, to get out, to call someone, to not walk alone into an underground tunnel toward an unknown person. But she'd spent 9 years tending to the sick and dying. She knew the difference between the sound of someone dangerous and someone who needed help. She moved forward. The tunnel was about 4 feet wide and just high enough to walk upright without ducking. She went slowly, the lamp cutting a narrow path through dust-heavy air. 15 feet. 20, 30. The breathing grew slightly louder. And then the tunnel ended at a door, a steel door mounted directly into the concrete wall, heavy and oxidized. The hinges dark with rust. The lock was a keyhole lock, the old-fashioned kind, the kind that took a skeleton key with a long, thick shaft, the kind of key she was carrying in her pocket. Isara's hands shook as she took it out. She steadied them deliberately, a habit from years of threading needles in difficult fit the key into the lock. It turned. The sound it made was loud in the silence. A solid, heavy click. The sound that had not been locked for a long time releasing. She pushed the door open. Not human. The room on the other side was small. Concrete walls. Concrete floor. A low ceiling with a single bare bulb wired to the old electrical system running through the tunnel. A wooden table, a bookshelf lined with volumes, and 2 leather binders. A camp stove on a shelf with several tins beside it. And against the far wall, a narrow cot. On the cot sat a man, thinner than she had ever seen him. His hair had gone entirely white. He wore a flannel shirt too large for his frame and work pants, gone gray at the knees. He had one hand raised to shield his eyes from the beam of her lamp. But she knew his hands. She had known his hands her entire life. The wide knuckles, the scar across the base of the right thumb from a forge burn, the particular way the fingers curled when at rest, and above his left eyebrow, a small raised scar, crescent-shaped, from falling off a ladder when Isara was 7, when he'd been fixing the gutters and she'd screamed from the yard. The lamp shook in her grip. Father, she said. The word came out barely above a whisper. Her throat had closed around it. The man on the cot slowly lowered his hand from his eyes. He blinked twice in the light, then looked directly at her. His expression was something she had never once seen on her father's face. He was afraid, not of her. See, she understood that immediately. He was afraid for her. "Isara," he said. His voice was rough, low, scraped thin by disuse. But it was his voice. There was not one atom of doubt in her body that it was his voice. Duh. She stood in the doorway of that underground room and looked at her father, the man whose coffin she had stood beside 6 months ago. Those graves she had watched fill with November dirt, whose death she had spent half a year learning to carry. And the world she thought she understood shifted completely off its axis. "Father," she said again. This time her voice broke on it. He rose slowly, broke on it, for slowly, from the cot, using the table for balance, moving with the careful deliberateness of someone who had been still for too long, straightened to his full height, still taller than her, even now, and looked at her with those gray eyes that Bryn had inherited. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Then he said very quietly, "The man they buried wasn't me." The room seemed to contract around those words. The man they buried wasn't me. Isara had stood at that burial, had placed her hand on that coffin, had cried in the wagon on the way home, and then again in her bed that night, and in quiet moments for 6 months after, in the healing house and at the market, in the middle of folding Bryn's small dresses, cried for a man who, according to everything she now understood, was alive. "How?" she said. The word came out flat, not a question exactly. More like the only sound she could make. "I need you to listen to me," her father said. "There are things I have to tell you. And we don't have much time." He paused. Something crossed his face. Something urgent. "Did you come alone?" Isara held his gaze. The answer that wanted to come. The easy automatic answer, the one a daughter gives to her father, was yes, of course yes. "I came alone." Viewance. But she thought of Declan's wagon outside, of his voice on the journey north, asking Numi, asking too many questions, of the way he had offered to come on before she decided to go. She thought of the note in her father's handwriting. "Do not trust Declan Ashridge." "No," she said. "I didn't come alone." Her father's expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He looked toward the tunnel behind her, then back at her. "Who came with you?" Isara watched his face carefully as she said it. "Declan," she said. "Declan Ashridge." Something went very still in Aldwin Winfield's eyes. Not surprise, something older than surprise. Something that looked like the confirmation of a fear he had been carrying for a long time. "Then, we have less time than I thought," he said quietly. He gestured to the single chair by the table. "Sit down, Isara." His voice carried the weight of years hidden underground. "And listen to everything I tell you." Isara sat in the chair her father had indicated. The concrete room felt smaller now, like the walls had moved closer while she wasn't looking. Aldwin remained standing. He moved to the bookshelf, pulled down one of the leather binders, set it on the table. "Between 23 years ago," he began. "I was the royal blacksmith in Ravencross." Isara blinked. Royal blacksmith. Her father, who lived in a 3-room cottage, who mended horseshoes for copper coins. "I specialized in weapons," he continued. "Swords, armor, things that required precision." He opened the binder. Inside were pages of careful handwriting, dates, times, notes. "One day the king's geologist came to my forge. He needed tools for a survey expedition. We talked while I worked. He mentioned they'd found something in the Northern Territories. Aldwin's finger traced a line in the binder. Starstone, the rarest magical ore in the realm. One vein of it under Silverpine. He looked at Isara. Do you know what Starstone does when forged into weapons? She shook her head. It makes them unbreakable, unnaturally sharp. A sword made with Starstone can cut through regular steel like it's butter. An army with Starstone weapons would be unstoppable. The lamp flickered. The geologist shouldn't have told me. But he was excited. And drunk. He showed me the survey maps. Showed me exactly where the vein ran. Aldwin closed the binder. I realized something that night. The land above the deposit was for sale, cheap. Because it was considered worthless. Too far from trade routes. You bought it. I bought it. All 85 acres. Before anyone else understood what was underneath, Isara's mind was racing. The king at the time was a good man. He would have compensated me fairly. Probably given me a position. But he died 3 years after I bought the land, and his son took the throne. Corvus Thorngate, the current Alpha King. Aldwin's voice went flat. Corvus is not a good man. He reached for the second binder, opened it. Inside were more pages, but these weren't notes. These were transcripts. 15 years ago, Aldwin said. Corvus learned about the Starstone deposit. I don't know how. Palace gossip. Someone who'd seen the original survey. Doesn't matter. He turned a page. He sent someone to make me an offer. A generous offer. More money than I'd see in 3 lifetimes. You said no, I said no. Aldwin's jaw tightened because I knew what he'd do with it. Corvus isn't interested in defending the realm. He's interested in conquest, in expansion, in being remembered. As the king who doubled the size of the territory, he looked at Isara. I couldn't be part of that. Isara thought about her father, the quiet blacksmith who fixed plows and hinges, who never raised his voice. Vu avoided conflict whenever possible. What happened after you refused? Aldwin. Sit quiet for a moment. Things started happening. He turned more pages in the binder. Each one documented an incident 14 years ago. Vehicle parked at the end of the driveway 3 nights in a row. No one inside, just watching. 13 years ago, break-in at the farmhouse. Nothing taken, just things moved. Searched 12 years ago. The barn burned, 4 horses inside, all dead. Isara's hand went to her mouth. Corvus did that. I couldn't prove it. The local magistrate said it was probably raiders, or an accident. But I knew. He closed the binder. After the fire, I went to the capital. Asked for an audience with the king, was denied. Tried to file a formal complaint. It disappeared into bureaucracy. So, you came to Lady Moira. So, I came to Lady Moira. Aldwin sat down across from Isara. Moira is the regional magistrate for the Northern Territories. She's one of few officials who can't be bought. We'd met years before, when I was still royal blacksmith. She remembered me. She believed you. She investigated quietly, found others Corvus had pressured. A rancher, 2 counties over, who'd refused to sell grazing land. His house burned down 6 months after he said no. He and his wife barely escaped. Aldwin's hands were very still on the table. Corvus is careful. He never connects himself directly to violence. Always maintains distance. Always has explanations. But you had a plan. Moira and I had a plan. Aldwin stood, moved to a small chest in the corner, opened it. Inside were dozens of small crystalline stones, each one glowing faintly with magical energy. Recording stones. I would fake my death, Aldwin said, and hide here. under the land, Corvus wanted. And I would record everything. He picked up one of the stones. These can capture sound, voices, conversations. When placed strategically around the property, they record anyone who comes here, anyone who speaks. You've been recording Corvus for 11 years. Aldwin set the stone back in the chest. Every time he visits the property, every conversation with his associates, every bribe offered, every threat made, every admission of what he's willing to do to get this land. He closed the chest. 11 years of evidence. Isara tried to process this, her father. Underground for 11 years. Living in this concrete tomb. Recording waiting. The man in the coffin, she said. Who was he? Aldwin's face softened, something like grief. His name was Edmund Gray, 58 years old. Found deceased in a rooming house in Milford. No family. No one looking for him. Moira arranged it. Moira has a contact in the coroner's office. Edmund had died of heart failure. Similar build to me, similar age. In the condition he was in, a closed casket identification wouldn't be questioned if the paperwork was correct. And the paperwork was correct. The paperwork was correct. Isara thought about the funeral. The closed coffin, the rain. Standing alone because her father had no family, except he did have family. He had her, and he'd let her believe he was dead. I'm sorry, Aldwin said quietly. As if reading her thoughts, I know what I put you through. I know what these 6 months have cost you. But I couldn't tell you. I couldn't risk, Declan. The name fell between them like a stone. Aldwin nodded slowly. Declan Ashridge appeared 7 years ago, 4 years after I went underground. He showed up in Windermere claiming we'd served together in the cavalry. You hadn't. I've never met the man before. In my life, Isara's stomach turned 7 years. 7 years of friendship, of help, of steady presence, all of it calculated. Moira confirmed it 3 years ago, Aldwin continued. She has sources in the capital. Declan Ashridge is on Corvus's private payroll. He was placed in Windermere to monitor you, to track anything you might know about this land. But I didn't know anything. Corvus couldn't be sure. He needed someone close to you, someone you'd trust, someone who could report back on your activities, your conversations, whether you ever mentioned Silverpeen or the inheritance or me. Aldwin's voice was gentle but firm. Every conversation you've had with Declan for 7 years. Every confidence shared. Every moment of grief he witnessed. All of it was reported back to Corvus Thorngate. Sara felt sick. She thought about Declan helping with her husband's funeral, sitting with her while she cried, calling to check on Bryn. All of it performance, all of it surveillance. There's more, Aldwin said quietly. He reached into the chest again, pulled out a specific recording stone, set it on the table, touched it. It began to glow. A voice filled the room, Declan's voice. But not the warm, reassuring tone Sara knew. This was cold. Businesslike. She knows nothing about Silverpeen. Aldwin never told her. She's cooperative. Trusting, second voice. Older, cultured, and the child. 5 years old. Bryn. The daughter is leverage if needed. Isara's blood went cold. If Isara becomes a problem, Declan's voice continued, the child can be used to ensure cooperation. I've maintained a relationship with the girl. She trusts me. Good, the second voice said. Keep it that way. I want options. The recording ended. Silence filled the concrete room. Isara couldn't breathe, couldn't think. They'd talked about Bryn, about using her daughter. Declan had built trusted with a 5-year-old specifically, so she could be leveraged. That second voice, Aldwin said, was Corvus. Isara looked at her father. Really looked at him, at the man who'd lived underground for 11 years, who'd let his daughter grieve him, who'd collected evidence against the most powerful man in the realm. "Why?" she said. "Why did you need me to come here?" Aldwin sat back down. "3 days ago," he said, "Moira sent the evidence to the Royal Council. All of it. The recordings, the transcripts, the documentation of bribes and threats and intimidation. Then it's over. They'll arrest him. Not yet. These things take time. The council has to authenticate the evidence, verify the sources, coordinate with the Crown prosecutor. It could be weeks before they move officially." He leaned forward. But Corvus doesn't know the evidence has been sent. He only knows that you're here. That the land I protected for 23 years is now in your name. And that his window for acquiring it is narrowing. So, he'll come here. He's probably already on his way. Isra's mind raced. Then we need to leave. Take the evidence and go. We can't. Why not? Aldwin gestured to the chest of recording stones. These are the originals. What Moira sent were copies. In court, original evidence carries more weight, has stronger chain of custody. If Corvus finds this room before the Royal Council acts, if he destroys these stones, the copies will be challenged. Good lawyers can create reasonable doubt. Corvus has good lawyers. Corvus has the best lawyers money can buy. Aldwin's expression was grave. We need to hold this position. Keep the evidence safe until the council moves. And we need to be ready. Ready for what? For whatever Corvus does when he realizes he's lost. A sound from above, faint but distinct. The creak of floorboards in the house. Aldwin froze. Listened. Another creak. Footsteps. Moving across the kitchen floor. Declan. Isara whispered. Aldwin moved quickly to a small device on the shelf. A magical amplifier. He activated it. The sounds from above became clearer. Footsteps in the house, opening doors, searching, then Declan's voice, calling out. "Isara, where are you?" Concern in his tone. Perfect, worried concern. The voice of a man genuinely anxious about a friend's whereabouts. Except Isara knew it was performance. Aldwin and Isara sat frozen in the underground room, listening to Declan search the house above. Minutes passed, then the footsteps moved outside, across the porch. Down the steps, Isara. Declan's voice was louder now, carrying across the open land. Then silence. Aldwin touched a different recording stone on the shelf. This one was connected to hidden observation points around the property. It projected sound from outside. They heard Declan's footsteps moving through grass. Then stop. "Well now," Declan murmured. Not calling out anymore, just talking to himself. "That's interesting." Aldwin's jaw tightened. He found the well. From the recording stone, they heard Declan move closer. Heard the scrape of wood as he moved the boards Isara had set aside. A pause. "A ladder," Declan said, still to himself. In a dry well, another pause, then footsteps moving away quickly back toward the house. Aldwin deactivated the observation stone. He's going to report to Corvus. How long do we have? If Corvus is in the region, maybe an hour, maybe less. Aldwin moved to the far corner of the room. Behind the cot, knelt down. Isara saw what she'd missed before, a seam in the concrete floor narrow. "Deliberate 4 years ago," Aldwin said. "I started digging an escape tunnel. It runs 60 feet west, comes up in the old equipment shed on the north edge of the property." He looked at Isara. "From there, we have clear run to the forest. About 120 yards. And from the forest, there's a fire road a 1/4 mile north. Moira is waiting there with the royal guard. She's been waiting since yesterday. Then we go now. Not yet. Aldwin stood. We wait until we know Corvus is here, until we know he's committed. Once he comes onto this property, once he makes his move, everything he does will be recorded. He gestured to a small device on his belt. This is a personal recording stone, voice activated. Everything said in my presence goes directly to a secure magical archive. Moira has access to it. Even if something happens to me, the recording survives. Isara felt cold. You're using yourself as bait. I'm making sure Corvus can't claim ignorance later. Can't say he didn't know. Can't hide behind intermediaries. Aldwin's voice was steady. Needs to see me, he. Needs to see me. Need to know I'm alive. Needs to understand that everything he said and done for years was recorded. That's insane. That's necessary. They waited. Sat in the concrete room, listening. 20 minutes passed. Then they heard it. The sound of multiple horses approaching. Not the single horse Declan had ridden. Many horses. An entire party. The recording stone captured voices. Declan's first. He's definitely been down there. The boards were moved. Lamp oil on the ladder rungs. Then another voice, older, authoritative. The voice from the recording Isara had heard earlier. How long ago? Can't be more than an hour. And the woman, I don't know where she is. She's not in the house. Not in the barn. A pause. She went down. That was Corvus. Isara was sure of it. Then we follow, Corvus said. Declan, take 2 men. Go down the well. Find them, Your Majesty. If they've barricaded, I don't care. Find them. Aldwin looked at Isara. Time to go. He moved to the corner, pulled aside a section of the concrete wall. Behind it, a passage low, narrow, about 2.5 feet high. You first, Aldwin said. Stay low. Move quickly. When you see light ahead, you're close to the shed. Isara looked at the passage, then at her father. We go together. Isara, no, I already lost you once. I'm not losing you again. Something crossed Aldwin's face. Not surprise, pride, then stay close. He went first, crawling into the narrow passage. Isara followed. The passage was exactly as he'd described, low enough that she had to crawl on hands and knees. The ceiling scraped her back. The walls pressed close. On both sides, darkness ahead, except for the faint glow of Aldwin's lamp. Behind them, distant sounds. Voices in the main tunnel. The doors locked. Break it down. The crack of wood. Metal groaning. They were coming. Isara crawled faster, 60 feet. The distance shouldn't take long. But in the dark, in the narrow passage. With her heart pounding, it felt endless. Her knees scraped concrete. Her shoulders brushed the walls. The pack with the evidence stones dug into her spine. Aldwin had insisted she carry it. If something happens to me, he'd said. You have to get these to Moira. She'd wanted to, but one look at his face had stopped her. Ahead. Aldwin paused. Light, he whispered. Gray light filtering through cracks. They'd reached the shed. Aldwin pushed against a panel overhead. It lifted. Cold morning air rushed in, the smell of pine and earth freedom. He climbed up first, then reached down to help Isara. She emerged into the old equipment shed. Rusted tools on the walls, a single window showing the farmstead behind them, and forest ahead. And between them and the forest, 120 yards of open ground. We stay low, Aldwin said. Use the fence line for cover as long as we can. They slipped out of the shed. The morning had fully broken now. Gray sky, cold wind. Isara could see the farmhouse in the distance, could see the horses tied out, could see men moving around the well. Aldwin and Isara ran in a crouch along the old fence. The grass was tall enough to provide some concealment, but not much. Halfway to the forest, Isara heard shouting. "They're not in the room. Find the exit. Your Majesty, there's a tunnel." More shouting. Then Declan's voice carrying across the open land. "There. By the north fence they'd been spotted. Run," Aldwin said. They abandoned stealth, sprinted for the tree line. Isara's lungs burned. The pack bounced against her spine. 40 yards, 30, behind them. The sound of men mounting horses. 20 yards, 10, they crashed. Crash it into the forest. Pine branches grabbed at their clothes. Roots tried to trip them. But the darkness under the canopy swallowed them, and for a moment, they were hidden. Aldwin pulled Isara behind a massive pine trunk, both of them breathing hard. From her belt, Isara pulled out a communication stone, one Aldwin had given her in the underground room. She activated it. Moira. She gasped. "We're in the forest, north side. Corvus is pursuing." Static. Then Moira's voice calm. "Professional, hold position. Royal Guard is 3 minutes out. Do not engage. Do not." The stone went dead. Isara stared at it. "What happened?" Aldwin took the stone. Examined it. Magical interference. Someone's blocking communications. Corvus has a mage core. Vis has everything. They heard horses entering the forest. Slower now. Careful hunting. Aldwin looked at Isara. "We have 2 choices. We can keep running. Try to reach the fire road before they catch us. Or what?" His expression was strange. "Or we stop running. Father, hear me out. Corvus needs to see me. Needs to know I'm alive. Needs to understand what I've done." That moment, that realization, that's what Moira needs recorded. He touched the device on his belt. "Everything we say will be captured. Even with communications blocked, this device stores locally. When Moira arrives, she'll have the recording." Isara shook her head. "That's too dangerous. Everything about this is dangerous. But running won't change anything. Corvus will keep hunting, keep threatening, keep trying to take this land." Aldwin stepped out from behind the tree. "The only way this ends is confrontation." Before Isara could stop him, he walked into a small clearing. Natural break. In the trees where sky showed through. He stood in the center waiting. Isara wanted to pull him back, wanted to drag him deeper into the forest, but something in his stance stopped her. The way he stood, straight, unflinching. A man who'd spent years preparing for this exact moment. She stepped out beside him. If he was going to face this, he wouldn't face it alone. Aldwin looked at her. "You should." "No," Isara said. "We do this together." For a long moment, he said nothing, then nodded once. They stood in the clearing, father and daughter, and waited. The horses came from 3 directions. Deck clan first, from the east, then 2 more men. Younger, harder, hired muscle. They formed a loose perimeter around the clearing, and then, from the south, a final horse. The rider was tall, silver-haired, wore a cloak of royal blue. Even in traveling clothes, his screamed authority. The bearing of someone who'd never been denied anything. Corvus Thorngate 8, Alpha King of the realm. He dismounted with practiced grace. Walked into the clearing, stopped 10 feet from Aldwin, and stared, just stared, at the man who was supposed to be dead. The color drained from Corvus's face, started at his jaw, and moved upward. His lips parted slightly for a moment, just a moment. The polished surface cracked, and underneath was raw, disoriented fear, the face of a man confronting something impossible. Then the surface closed again. Not completely. "But enough, Aldwin," he said. His voice was was controlled, but the first syllable caught just slightly. Isara heard it. Aldwin said nothing, just stood there, letting Corvus see him, letting the reality sink in. "You're supposed to be dead," Corvus said. "I was. The funeral, attended by my daughter and no one else. A closed coffin. Very sad." Corvus's jaw worked. "How long?" 11 years. Buck Askelin. Isar watched understanding dawn on the king's face. 11 years. Years of visiting Silverpine, of discussing plans with his associates, of offering bribes and making threats, of believing the only witness was dead. "You've been here," Corvus said slowly, "the entire time. Under your feet, recording. Every word." Silence fell over the clearing. Behind Corvus, Declan shifted his weight, looking for an exit, looking for a way to minimize his exposure. But there was no exit, not anymore. Corvus looked at Isara, really looked at her for the first time. "The daughter, my name is Isisara Winfield. I'm the legal owner of this property. You're trespassing." "Trespassing." Corvus smiled. "Cold. On land that should be mine. Land you can't have. Everything can be bought. Or taken." Isara stepped forward. "The recordings have been sent to the Royal Council. 3 days ago, everything you've said. Every bribe offered, every threat made. It's all documented." She gestured to the pack on her back. "These are the originals. But even if you destroy them, the copies exist. You've already lost." Corvus stood very still, processing, calculating, looking for the angle, the remaining move. "Copies can be challenged," he said. "Original evidence is cleaner. If something were to happen to those recordings." "Stop." Isara's voice cut through the clearing. "I want you to understand something. Every word you're speaking right now is being recorded. This device," she pointed to the stone on Aldwin's belt, "uploads automatically to a secure archive. Not on this property. Not somewhere you can reach. It's already there. Your lawyers can't challenge it, can't suppress it, can't make it disappear." She paused. "You've already said too much." Corvus looked at Aldwin, then at Isara, then at the device on Aldwin's belt. His face showed the exact moment calculation became realization, became understanding, that there was no buffed move left. No angle remaining, that a man who'd been buying his problems for 40 years had finally encountered a problem money couldn't solve. He looked at Declan. "You assured me the situation was contained." Declan said nothing. His face had gone pale. In the distance, Isara heard something, faint but growing louder. Hoof beats. Many hoofbeats coming from the north. Lady Moira emerged from the trees on horseback. Behind her, 6 mounted guards wearing the royal crest. Not Corvus's personal guards, crown guards, answering only to the royal council. Moira dismounted. She was a spare woman in her 50s. Short gray hair, the quiet authority of someone who'd enforced law in difficult places. She walked into the Cleachebring, looked at Corvus, Alpha King Corvus, Thorngate. "By order of the Royal Council, you are under arrest for conspiracy, bribery of public officials, intimidation, and attempted theft of property." Her voice carried the weight of patient investigation. "Of waiting for this exact moment, you have the right to answer these charges before the council." 2 guards moved forward. One produced iron manacles. For a moment, Isara thought Corvus might resist, might try to use his authority, his position. But he stood motionless as they secured the manacles. His eyes never left Aldwin's face. 11 years, he said quietly. 11 years you could have sold, become wealthy, lived in comfort. Aldwin shook his head slowly. "Some things aren't for sale." Moira gestured to 2 more guards, Declan Ashridge. You're also under arrest as an accomplice. Compla. Declan didn't fight, just held out his hands for the manacles. But before they closed around his wrists, he looked at Isara. There was something in his face, not remorse exactly, not guilt. Something more complicated, the expression of a man who'd spent 7 years performing care and had arrived at the moment where he had to acknowledge what that performance cost, what it took from the people who believed it. "I'm sorry," he said, 2 words. "Que?" Isara looked at him, at the man who'd helped bury her husband, who'd sat with her through grief, who'd threatened to use her daughter as leverage. She said nothing, just turned away, because there was nothing Declan Ashridge could say. Nothing that would make 7 years of lies into something forgivable. The guards led both men away. Moira approached Aldwin. "You look terrible." "Years underground will do that. The recordings." Isara unslung the pack from her back, handed it to Moira, "All of them. Plus the device on my father's belt has this morning's confrontation." Moira took the pack, checked the contents, nodded with satisfaction. "This is it. This is everything the council needs. Corvus will be convicted. Probably stripped of the crown." She looked at Aldwin. "It's over." Aldwin swayed slightly. Isara moved to support him. He was exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried him through the confrontation was fading. "Let's get you both out of here," Moira said. They walked back through the forest. Slower now, the danger passed. Aldwin leaned on Isara, not because he needed physical support, though he did, but because for the first time in years, he could. At the tree line, Isara stopped, looked back at Silverpine, at the farmhouse, the barn, the 85 acres, at the well where her father had lived for so long. "What happens to the land?" she asked. Moira considered. "That is up to you. You're the legal owner. The Crown might make an offer for mining rights, but they can't force you to sell. The Starstone is yours to decide about." Isara thought about that. About the power buried under these fields. About what it could create. What it could destroy, I think, she said slowly. "Some things should stay buried." Zuried. Aldwin looked at his daughter. In his eyes was something Isara had never seen before. Not surprise, not pride. Understanding, clean understanding. Some things should stay buried. He agreed. They walked together toward Moira's horses, toward guards and safety, and the long journey back to something resembling normal life. Behind them, Silverpines sat quiet in the gray morning. The well, with its ladder descending into darkness, the tunnel, the concrete room. All of it empty now, all of it waiting for grass to grow over the entrance, for vines to reclaim the stones, for time to make it just another forgotten place where nothing important ever happened. 6 months later, Isara stood courthouse, gallery watching in Califking's Thorngate receive since 30 years, imprisonment, stripped of title, stripped of land holdings, stripped of holdings, stripped of everything except the weight of his crimes of the judge. The judge's voice echoed through the marble chamber, your abuse of power, your willingness to threaten and intimidate innocent citizens, your complete disregard for the law you were sworn to uphold. These actions are incompatible with leadership of any kind. Corvus stood motionless. His silver hair had gone entirely white in the 6 months since his arrest. His face was gaunt. The bearing of absolute authority had crumbled. What remained was an old man who'd miscalculated badly, who'd believed power was permanent, who'd learned too late that some things can't be bought or threatened into submission. The guards led him away. He didn't look at the gallery, didn't look at anyone, just walked with his head down. A king reduced to prisoner. In the corridor outside, Isara found Lady Moira waiting. "It's done," Moira said. "Yes. How do you feel?" Isara considered the question. How did she feel? Not triumphant, not quite relieved.
Something quieter than either.
Tired, she said finally. Moira nodded.
That's honest.
Most people expect you to be celebrating. I'm not most people. No, you're not. They walked together down the marble corridor, past portraits of former kings and queens, past windows showing the capital city spread below. Ravencross in early spring, cherry blossoms on the trees, market stalls in the square, life continuing as it always did, regardless of who wore the crown. "What about Declan?" Isara asked. 15 years. He cooperated with the prosecution, provided testimony about Corvus's other high-activities. The judge considered that in sentencing, 15 years, less than Corvus. But still. 15 years of Declan Ashridge sitting in a cell thinking about 7 years of lies, about what he'd traded his integrity for, whether the money had been worth it. Isara doubted he'd find a satisfying answer. She found her father in the courthouse, a garden, sitting on a stone bench beneath a flowering tree, looking more like himself now. Vox. 6 months of sunlight and proper food had filled out his frame. The remained. But the gone was gone, replaced by something steadier, more solid. He looked up as she approached. "It's over," she said. "I heard. 30 years, is that enough?" Aldwin was quiet. For a moment. Nothing would be enough. Not really. But it's something. It's justice. And sometimes that's all we get. Isara sat beside him. They watched the cherry blossoms drift in the breeze, pink petals settling on marble like snow. "Bryn wants to know when you're coming home," Isara said. Home, the word sat between them. Heavy, with meaning. "She asks about you every day." Batsumum. "About when grandfather is coming back to Windermere." Aldwin's expression softened. "How much have you told her? That you were sick? That you needed special treatment in the capital? That you're better now? And she believed that?" "She's 5. She believes what her mother tells her." Isara looked at her father. "But one day she'll be older. She'll ask questions, real questions. And I'll have to decide how much truth to share. What will you say?" "I don't know yet." The cherry blossoms continued falling. That evening, Isara returned to the small house she'd rented in Ravencross, temporary accommodation while the trial proceeded. Bryn was at the table with colored pencils, drawing something elaborate and incomprehensible. "Mama." The child launched herself at Isara. All energy and momentum. Isara caught her, held her close, breathed in the smell of honey soap and childhood. "What are you drawing?" "A castle, with dragons. And a princess who knows magic." "Of course she does." Isara set Bryn down. Looked at the drawing more carefully. It was actually quite good. Detailed in the way children's drawings rarely are. "Grandfather taught me about perspective," Bryn said proudly. "See, the dragon in back is smaller because it's far away." "When did he teach you that?" "Yesterday. We drew for hours." Isara felt something warm settle in her chest. Her father teaching Bryn to draw. After years of teaching no one anything. After years of license and isolation. He was building a relationship with his granddaughter, one colored pencil at a time. Later, after Bryn was asleep, Aldwin arrived. He'd been staying in different lodgings across the city, giving Iara space, not presuming welcome. They sat in the small kitchen drinking tea. "The trial's done," Aldwin said. "I'll be leaving Ravencross soon." Isara's hand stilled on her cup. "Leaving?" "Going back to Windermere." To the cottage. If it's still standing, it's standing. I paid the widow Thorne to check on it monthly. Thank you. Silence fell between them. Not uncomfortable, but weighted. Full of things unsaid. You could stay here, Isara offered. In the capital, there's work for blacksmiths. Good work. The royal forges are always hiring. Aldwin shook his head. I've had enough of kings and courts. Enough of power and politics. I want to fix plows and mend horseshoes and live quietly. He looked at her. If that's acceptable, you don't need my permission to live your life, don't I? The question hung in the air. Isara set down her tea. You let me you were dead for 6 months. You used me as a legal instrument to transfer evidence, to put me in danger without my knowledge or consent. She paused. So yes. Maybe you do need my permission. Aldwin accepted this, nodded slowly. You're right. I made choices that affected you without consulting you. I justified it by telling myself it was necessary, that I was protecting you, were you? I thought I was. Now I'm not sure. Maybe I was just protecting the mission, the evidence. The case against Corvus. He met her eyes. I'm sorry. Truly, I can't undo what I did. Can't give you back those 6 months of grief, but I can promise to be honest going forward. To not make choices about your life without you. Isara studied her father's face, saw sincerity there, and regret. Something else. Hope, maybe. That forgiveness was possible. Okay, she said finally. Okay, you can go back to Windermere. You can live in the cottage. You can be Bryn's grandfather. But no more secrets, no more hidden plans. If something affects me or my daughter, I need to know, agreed. And you have to actually talk to me about real things. Not just weather and crops. A smile tugged at Aldwin's mouth. That might be harder than years underground. Try anyway. They returned to Windermere. A week later, the journey took 4 days.
But this time it felt different.
Not tense or suspicious.
Just long.
And honestly a bit boring, which was exactly what Isara needed. Boring, normal, the kind of journey where nothing happens except miles passing and Bryn complaining about sitting still. When they crested the final hill and saw Windermere spread below, the village with its cluster of cottages. The healing house where Isara had worked for years, the fields green with spring planting. She felt something. Release in her chest. Home complicated and imperfect. But home. The widow Thorne was the first to see them arrive. She came bustling out of her cottage, moving remarkably fast for someone with rheumatism. Isara, you're back. And Aldwin. She stopped, stared at Aldwin. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. But you're dead. I got better. The widow Thorne looked between them, processing. Then shook her head. I'm too old for this nonsense. Come inside. Both of you. I want the whole story. And it better be good. They told her. An edited version. Aldwin had been ill. Very ill. Had needed specialized treatment only available in the capital. The funeral had been a misunderstanding, paperwork errors, the kind of bureaucratic chaos that happens with royal physicians and official documents. The widow Thorne didn't believe a word, but she was tactful enough not to press. Well, she said finally, welcome back to the land of the living, Aldwin Winfield. Try to stay here this time. I'll do my best. News of Aldwin's return spread through Windermere like fire through dry grass. By evening, half the village had found reasons to walk past Isara's cottage, to catch a glimpse, to confirm the impossible. Aldwin Winfield. Alive. Most were too polite to ask direct questions. But the speculation was endless. Isara heard fragments of it at the market, heard he was in hiding. Some kind of witness protection. My cousin said he was sick. One of those wasting diseases that reverses. I think it was love trouble. A woman. He had to leave. Came back when it was safe. Isara let them speculate. The truth was too complicated. Too strange. And honestly, none of their business. 2 months after their return, Isara stood in the healing house treating a farmer's infected hand. The work was familiar. Cleaning wounds, wrapping bandages, dispensing herbs, the stera, nasnave, of helping people with small problems after 6 months of courts and kings and life or death stakes. Small problems felt like luxury. That'll need changing daily, she told the farmer. Come back in 3 days so I can check it. Will do, Miss Isara. Thank you. He left. Isara was washing her hands when she heard footsteps on the porch. She looked up, expecting another patient, instead found her father in the doorway. Do you have a moment? He asked. Always. He came inside, looked around the healing house, with its shelves of herbs and racks of bandages. I never properly appreciated this place, he said. What you do here, it's just healing. It's more than that. You care for people, really care. Not because you have to, because you choose to. Isara dried her hands. Is there something specific you wanted to talk about? Aldwin pulled a fold paper from his pocket, set it on the table. A letter arrived today. From the crown, Isara felt her stomach tighten. What kind of letter? An offer. Foff. Siuga. For mining rights to the Starstone deposit under Silverpine. They're willing to give him handsomely, plus a percentage of profits from any ore extracted. He slid the paper toward her. The numbers are substantial. Isara looked at the letter without touching it. How substantial? Enough that you'd never have to work again. Bryn could have the best education. You could buy a proper house. Travel. Whatever you wanted. Silence. Isara picked up the letter, read through the formal language and legal clauses. The numbers were indeed substantial. More money than she'd ever imagined having. Enough, do you think I should do? She asked. Aldwin was quiet for a long moment. 23 years ago, he said finally. I bought that land because I didn't want Corvus to have the Starstone. Didn't want him making weapons of conquest. And now Corvus is in prison. And the Crown is making promises about responsible mining. About limiting military applications. Do you believe them? I want to. But power has a way of corrupting even good intentions. He looked at Isara. The choice is yours. I signed the land over to you completely. No conditions, no strings. Whatever you decide, I'll support. Isara folded the letter. Can I think about it? Of course. After Aldwin left, Isara sat in the quiet healing house, thinking about money and power, about what they make possible and what they cost. That evening, she talked to Bryn. If we had a lot of money, Isara said carefully, what would you want? Bryn looked up from her drawing. A pony. Besides a pony, a castle. We can't actually buy a castle. Why not? Fair question. Let's say we could have anything reasonable. What would you choose? Bryn thought about this with the seriousness only a 5-year-old can muster. I'd want grandfather to stay, she said finally. Not go away again. Something cracked in Isara's chest. He's not going away. Promise? Promise. Bryn returned to her drawing, satisfied. But Isara sat with the words. I'd want grandfather to stay. Not money, not things. Just family. Just presence, the most valuable thing. And the thing that couldn't be bought. 3 days. Later, Isara sent her response to the Crown. She declined the mining offer. Instead, she requested that Silver Pine be designated protected land. No mining, no development. Just 85 acres of northern wilderness, preserved as it was. The Crown officials were confused. They sent another letter asking if she understood the value. She was refusing. Asara sent a second response. I understand and perfectly. The answer is still no. Lady Moira rode out to Windermere personally, arrived on a gray afternoon with rain threatening. You're turning down a fortune, she said without preamble. I am. May I ask why? Isara poured tea. They sat in her small kitchen while rain began pattering on the roof. My father spent years protecting that land, Isara said. Not because he wanted wealth. Because he believed some things shouldn't be disturbed. She looked at Moira. I think he was right. The world has enough weapons, enough conflicts, enough people fighting over resources, so you'd rather have nothing. I'd rather have peace, and the knowledge that I didn't add more fuel to someone else's war. Moira sipped her tea. You're a very unusual woman. Isara Winfield. My father was an unusual man. I learned from him. He'd be proud, I hope so. Human. The fumist. Months passed. Summer arrived hot and golden. Aldwin rebuilt his forge in Windermere, took on apprentices, taught young people the art of working metal. Not weapons. Never weapons. Just tools. Horseshoes, hinges. Things that helped rather than harmed. Isara continued her work at the healing house. But now when difficult cases arose, when someone needed more help than she could provide alone. Her father was there, not as a blacksmith, but as someone who understood isolation, who'd spent years alone with his thoughts. Who could talk to the desperate and lonely in ways that actually helped. They became a team, healer and counselor, medicine and understanding. And slowly, very slowly, the distance between them closed. One evening in late summer, Isara and Aldwin sat on her porch watching Bryn chase fireflies in the garden. She's happy, Aldwin observed. She is. Are you? Isara considered the question. Was she happy? 6 months ago, she'd been standing in a clearing facing down a king, carrying evidence that could destroy the most powerful man in the realm, terrified and determined in equal measure. Now she was watching her daughter, planning tomorrow's work, at the healing house, drinking tea with her father who was supposed to be dead. Yes, she said, I think I am. Aldwin nodded. They sat in comfortable silence. I need to tell you something, he said after a while. Isara tensed slightly. What? Nothing bad, just something I should have said months ago. He turned to look at her. You saved me. Not just in the physical sense, though you did that too, but in the larger sense. I spent years underground because I believed it was necessary. Believed I was the only one who could stop Corvus. You were, maybe, but I'd forgotten something important. That, the point of all, that sacrifice wasn't just stopping a bad man. It was protecting something good. Protecting you. Protecting Bryn. Protecting the kind of life worth living. His voice was quiet but firm. When you walked into that clearing, when you stood beside me facing Corvus, you reminded me what I'd been fighting for. Not just justice, but family. Connection. The people we love. Isara felt tears prickling behind her eyes. I was terrified, I know, but you stayed. That took more courage than years underground. I don't feel courageous, no one ever does, that's the secret. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's being afraid and showing up anyway. The fireflies drifted through the garden like living stars. Bryn's laughter carried on the evening air. Somewhere in the distance, a nightbird called. What do you think will happen to Silverpine? Isara asked. It'll sit there. Grass will grow over the well. The house will slowly fall apart. Eventually, no one will remember what happened there. Is that okay with you? Aldwin thought about this. Yes, I think it is. Not everything needs to be remembered. Not everything needs to be a monument. Sometimes it's enough that that a choice was made, that people stood up when it mattered. He gestured to the garden, to Bryn, to the fireflies, to all of it. This is what matters. Not the grand dramatic moments, but the quiet ordinary ones. The evenings on the porch, the child playing in the garden, the simple peace of being alive. Isara reached over, took her father's hand. I'm glad you came back. So am I. 6 more months passed. Winter arrived, cold and clean. Snow-covered Windermere in white silence. Isara stood at her window one morning, watching Aldwin and Bryn building a snowman in the garden. Bryn was dictating specifications. The snowman needed a carrot no-nose, coal eyes, stick arms, positioned just so. Aldwin followed instructions with patient precision. The same patience he'd used to survive years underground, now applied to making a 6-year-old happy. Isara thought about the journey that had brought them here, the letter from a lawyer in Ravencross, the strange inheritance, the note hidden under floorboards, the underground room, the confrontation in the forest, all of it leading to this moment. Her father and daughter building a snowman, laughing. Together, was it worth it? The 6 months of grief, the danger, the fear, the complicated mess of truth and lies. Isara watched Bryn throw a snowball at Aldwin, watched him pretend to be mortally wounded, fall dramatically into the snow while Bryn shrieked with delight. Yes, it was worth it. That afternoon, a messenger arrived from Ravencross, official-looking crown seal on the documents. Isara's stomach sank. More offers for Silverpine, probably. More pressure to reconsider. But when she opened the letter, she found something different. A royal commendation for service to the realm, for preserving evidence of corruption, for courage in the face of danger, signed by the new crown prince, the one who'd taken Corvus's place. There was a second letter beneath the first, personal. Not official, Miss Winfield. The realm owes you a debt that can never be fully repaid. Your actions exposed corruption at the highest levels and reminded us that true nobility comes from character, not birthright. Your decision to preserve Silverpine rather than profit from it has been noted. The Crown agrees. The land will remain protected in perpetuity. Thank you for your service. Prince Aldrich of Ravencross. Isara read both letters twice, then showed them to her father. A commendation, Aldwin said. How official. Do you want one? I can probably request it. No, thank you. I've had enough of royal attention for one lifetime. He handed back the letters. But I'm glad Silverpine will stay protected. That was the right choice, was it, though? We could have used the money. We could have. But you would have spent the rest of your life wondering if it was worth it. If enabling more weapons, more wars, more death was worth personal comfort. He looked at her steadily. Now, you don't have to wonder. You know you chose right. That's worth more than gold. Spring came. Spring came again. A full year since Isara had first traveled to Silverpine, since she'd received the letter that changed everything. She stood in her garden. Herbs for the healing house. Bryn was meant to be helping, instead was mostly digging holes and filling them again. 6-year-old assistants. Mama, Bryn said suddenly. Can I ask you something? Always. Was grandfather really sick? Or was it something else? Isara's hand stilled in the dirt. She looked at her daughter, 6 years old but already too perceptive for comfortable lies. What makes you think it was something else? People whisper. At the market. In the square. They stop when they see me, but I hear things. Bryn sat back on her heels. They say grandfather was hiding, that he fought a king, that he was a hero. Isara took a breath, deciding how much truth, how much protection. Come here, she said finally. Bryn moved to sit beside her mother. Isara put an arm around her daughter. Your grandfather did something very brave. He saw people being hurt, being threatened, and he decided to stop it. Even though it was dangerous. Even though it cost him years of his life, like a knight in the stories. Sort of, but quieter. No sword or armor. Just patience and courage, and you helped him. I did. At the end, Bryn processed this. Were you scared? Terrified. But you did it anyway? But I did it anyway. Bryn nodded seriously. That's very brave, Mama. Thank you, sweetheart. Turned to planting herbs. But Isara felt some shift. Her daughter understanding a fundamental truth, that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite fear, showing up. When it would be easy to hide me. Michichus, what's right? Even when it's hard. That evening, Aldwin came for dinner, a new tradition. Every week, he'd arrive with bread from the baker. They'd eat together, all three of them. A family, imperfect and complicated. But real. After Bryn went to bed, Isara and Aldwin sat by the fire. She asked about Silverpine today. Isara said, "What did you tell her?" The truth, an edited version. But the truth, how did she take it? Better than I expected. She called you a hero. Aldwin smiled slightly. I'm not a hero, just a stubborn old man who wouldn't sell his land. Sometimes that's the same thing. They sat watching flames dance in the hearth. Do you ever regret it? Isara asked. Years underground. Everything you missed. Aldwin was quiet for a long time. I regret missing parts of your life. Missing Bryn's early years. Missing ordinary moments that can never be recreated. He paused. But I don't regret stopping Corvus. Don't regret protecting that land. Some things are worth sacrifice. Even years. Even years. Outside, snow began falling again. Soft and silent. Covering Windermere in white. 2 years later. Bryn was 8. Aldwin was 62. Isara was 31. Life had settled into the rhythms. Predictable. Ordinary. Exactly what Isara had never thought she wanted. And exactly what she needed. The healing house stayed busy. Aldwin's fort, steady work. Bryn attended the village school, showed promise in both drawing and mathematics, got in trouble occasionally for asking too many questions, but mostly thrived. One spring afternoon, Isara received another letter, this time from a university in Ravencross. They'd heard about her healing. Work. We're offering her a position as lecturer in practical medicine. Good salary. Housing provided. Access to resources she could never have in Windermere. It was everything she should want. Prestige. Recognition. Advancement. She showed the letter to Aldwin. What will you do? He asked. I don't know. It's a good opportunity. It is, but... Isara looked around her small kitchen, at the garden visible through the window, at the familiar walls that had sheltered her through grief and joy, and everything between. But this is home, she said simply. Aldwin nodded. Then stay. The university. We'll find someone else. There are always opportunities, Isara. But there's only one Windermere. Only one life here with Bryn and me. Only one chance to watch your daughter grow up in a place where everyone knows her name. He smiled. Stay. Not because you're afraid of leaving, but because you're choosing this actively. deliberately. Isara declined the university position, sent a polite letter thanking them for the consideration, explaining that her work in Windermere was where she was needed most. The dean wrote back, expressing disappointment but understanding, added that if she ever changed her mind, the offer would remain open. Isara filed the letter away, knowing she probably wouldn't change her mind. Some people are meant for cities and universities, for advancement and recognition. But she'd discovered something over the past years. She was meant for this, for the healing house and the garden, for Bryn's bedtime stories, and her father's quiet presence, for the ordinary miraculous work of building a life, one day at a time. She stood at the edge of her garden, watching sunset paint sky. Bryn was in Sunside doing homework. Aldwin was in his cottage reading by lamplight. The village was settling into evening quiet. Isara thought about the journey that had brought her here, all the choices made and roads not taken. The fortune refused. The recognition declined, the simple persistent choice to stay, to build something here, to be content with enough rather than grasping for more. She thought about Bryn, growing up confident and curious, knowing her grandfather's stories, understanding that courage comes in quiet forms. She thought about Aldwin, finally at peace after years of hiding, building relationships, teaching, living openly. She thought about herself, healing the sick, growing herbs, raising a daughter, work that mattered even if no one wrote songs about it. Yes, she'd made the right choices. Not the dramatic ones, not the ones that would be remembered in history books, but the ones that built a life worth living. And in the end, that was the only legacy that mattered.